It's nice to see Donald Trump lending his self-tanner to Joe Biden last night. Did you see that? Joe Biden giving a speech last night at about 6:45 our time. Now, I didn't see it live. I had enough chaos in my world with toddlers screaming and babies hungry that I didn't need to add, Joe Biden on top of that last night at about 6:45. But thankfully, it was a 5-minute speech. So I went back, I watched it, and his hypocrisy knows no bounds. But I couldn't get over the self-tanner last night. I'm like, this guy, looked like he had one foot in the grave last Thursday. Finally, they throw some tanner on him. So is this the part where I say orange man bad as I'm watching Joe Biden in his self-tanner last night?
See what you did there.
Thank you very much, John. But obviously, the speech was all about the decision by the Supreme Court, the 6-3 decision by the Supreme Court that focuses on the institution of the presidency and the ability of all presidents, not merely Donald Trump, to act in the national interests free from prosecution for official acts. And as I watched people much smarter than me write about this yesterday, debate this on television yesterday, this comment from Bill Barr, the former attorney general for Donald Trump, two guys that really don't like each other. Barr's been highly critical of Donald Trump since leaving office. This is what he said in a long-form interview on Fox yesterday with Neil Cavuto. About 20 minutes long. But this line is what stood out to me about how the reaction to this decision by the Supreme Court on the left side of the political aisle has been done through the prism of Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump. But as Bill Barr noted yesterday, you cannot make these decisions if you're the Supreme Court because of one man at one point in history. That's not how this can go.
I would say what the Chief Justice said in the opinion, which is the Supreme Court has to write an opinion, a timeless opinion, an opinion that covers all situations in the future and that will be good for the country over the long haul. And they can't write opinions tailored to the particular exigencies of the moment. So that said, I think that there's ample teeth remaining because they have said that even official acts can be prosecuted if the government can show, under the circumstances, the particular facts of the case, that it would not impair the executive function.
So that was Bill Barr yesterday reacting to this. And in the majority opinion written by Chief Justice John Roberts, far from a Donald Trump appointed lackey, MAGA courtman or something like that, the chief writes here on behalf of the majority yesterday, a president inclined to take one course of action based on the public interest may instead opt for another, apprehensive that criminal penalties may befall him upon his departure from office. And if a former president's official acts are routinely subjected to scrutiny in criminal prosecutions, quote, the independence of the executive branch, end quote, may be significantly undermined. So remember, the Supreme Court is not looking at this and cannot look at this through the prism of Donald Trump, through the prism of a Trump case. That's not how you can look. We all know enough to understand you can't look at it through the simple prism of Donald Trump or one situation. And that's what you're hearing from John Roberts in that majority opinion. So Joe Biden gets up there yesterday and does what we basically expected him to do. And that is to attack the Supreme Court for political purposes. That was the only goal of Joe Biden last night. Now, I was thinking about this after I watched his little 5-minute spiel from the White House. And I thought, okay, so Joe Biden just attacked an institution of the American government from the White House. Boy, that seems awfully insurrection-y. Seems awfully destabilizing. And he's doing it to help win an election. Joe Biden is the Democrats' Donald Trump, and now he's got the bronzer to boot.
I know I will respect the limits of the presidential powers I have for 3.5 years.
Really?
But any president, including Donald Trump, will now be free to ignore the law. I concur with Justice Sotomayor's dissent today. Here's what she said. She said, in every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. With fear for our democracy, I dissent. End of quote. So should the American people dissent. I dissent. May God bless you all, and may God help preserve our democracy. Thank you.
You know, it really took some stones there from Joe Biden, especially the first 5 seconds of that.
I know I will respect the limits of the presidential powers I have for 3.5 years.
Really? Because I remember you saying this a few weeks ago about the student loans.
The Supreme Court blocked me from relieving student debt, but they didn't stop me.
I thought of that one, too.
Yeah. There's a few others I could think of, but that's certainly the most egregious, where, you know, he's literally bragging about defying the Supreme Court. You would think that there would be some self-reflection, or you would think that maybe they hope the media wouldn't go out there and say anything like this and compare and contrast what a guy literally has said when he brags about defying the Supreme Court and then stand up in front of the American people last night and say,
I know I will respect the limits of the presidential powers I have for 3.5 years.
Really? Because it didn't take me long. It took me all of, less than 5 minutes this morning to dig up that clip where you are bragging about defying the Supreme Court. So this is all about politics. This is not about getting granular in the rule of law, and we will have on legal experts this morning to react to the legal side of this. But the 35,000-foot view politically is that this is a way for the Democratic Party to try to drum up its base after last week's debacle and once again create this impression of, oh, man, if the orange man, although now you got to define which orange man you're talking about after seeing Joe last night, but the OG orange man, the orange man's going to get back in there and he's going to be a dictator. He is going to be a king. That's what he's going to do. Even Mayor Lucas, who was in Michigan over the weekend on behalf of Joe Biden, tweeted out yesterday after the Supreme Court decision in Trump v. U.S., Mayor Q writing, the Supreme Court is doing their damnedest to remind y'all to vote in November. They've got nothing. So they have to fearmonger around Supreme Court decisions on Donald Trump being a great dictator if he ends up back in the White House, because it's all they've got.
Yeah, and yet for all the whir, here's me thinking it's business as usual regarding the presidency, that they operate kind of under some secrecy, classified documents, et cetera, et cetera. No specifics to point out, but nothing changes in my mind. Right?
That's more or less how I look at it. There were always protections, as there should be, to being the president, because if not, especially in today's hyper-partisan climate, all these guys or gals would be getting sued the second they step out of office. And by the way, this protects Joe Biden from getting, potentially dealt with legally for his handling of the border. That's my understanding of it. 913-408-7957. So now the question is this. Can the Democrats use this? Can Joe Biden and his campaign use this to fire up their base, which has zero fire in that belly after last Thursday night? Well, here's what some new polling is suggesting. We'll share that with you coming up next on KCMO 95.7 FM. So here's another reason that last night at about 7 o'clock our time, the White House sent Joe Biden out to do a press conference ripping the Supreme Court. The polling has been disastrous in the wake of last Thursday's debate, and it's just starting to come out. So there are now starting to be some statewide polling that has been done in the wake of the debate. And some of the key swing states that obviously people are looking at, we know the 6 states that are going to get all the attention: Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia. Probably where all the attention's going to be come November 5th. Well, a new poll released over the weekend shows that Donald Trump now has a 49-45 lead over Joe Biden in Michigan. Now, that is just barely within the margin of error, plus or minus 4%. And, you know, this is a poll that actually was conducted just a couple of days before he got on that debate stage. It dropped in the last 48 hours, but it was technically done right before the debate in Michigan. And there's no way there's anything that happened on Thursday night that swayed people back towards or more in favor of Joe Biden. I mean, that's impossible. So this poll dropped yesterday, was picked up by Fox News, and that's a bad look for Joe Biden in a state that he more or less, doesn't have to win, but certainly is one of those states that he feels he needs to win to find himself in a position to win 4 more years in the White House. This one out of New Hampshire. Right now in New Hampshire, Donald Trump leading Joe Biden 44-42. That is a 12-point swing from an identical December poll, which found Joe Biden with a 10-point lead in the state of New Hampshire. This is done by the St. Anselm College poll, which is a big college poll up there in New Hampshire. So it found the poll underperforming in New Hampshire, despite Democrats holding a narrow lead over Republicans in party registration and in the generic ballot. When only given the political parties, voters sided with Democrats 46-43, according to a poll. But then when given the option, Donald Trump to Joe Biden, it's Donald Trump that is edging out Joe Biden by 2 points. On top of that, in this poll in New Hampshire, Trump leads Biden among the key demographic of moderate voters in that state, 44-38. Now, neither candidate is overly popular. We know that. 39% of respondents have a favorable opinion of Joe Biden. 42% have a favorable opinion of Donald Trump. So Trump technically more popular in New Hampshire than is Joe Biden. Among respondents who say they dislike both candidates, this is interesting. Among respondents who say they dislike both candidates, 30% backed Biden to 13% supporting Trump. So that tells me that Trump's base is stronger. People still dislike, at least in some of these, more moderate bluish states, they dislike Donald Trump more than they dislike Joe Biden. But still, Trump's winning in that state if you buy into some of these polls right now, which you take them with a grain of salt. Doesn't mean you start doing a happy dance if you're a Donald Trump supporter and you start doing your cartwheels. But this is why Joe Biden felt compelled to get on in front of that podium last night and use a Supreme Court decision to drum up his base, to scare his base, and to fire people up. And by the way, if you took the under 2 minutes into the speech before Joe Biden mentioned January 6th last night, well, ding, 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 ding. You are a winner. Did you have that in your parlay, or did you not have time to place a bet last night, Mark, before this speech dropped?
I was so in the dark on that. I didn't know Dark Brandon was coming out.
Yeah, well, that makes 2 of us. That's okay. I was not aware of it either until it was happening, and my phone started blowing up. And I was like, okay, I got bottles. I got pee-pee everywhere. I got, teeth that need to be brushed. I'll watch it later. I could have watched Joe Biden on TV, which would have been very similar to what I was doing anyway. But anyway, here he was under 2 minutes into the speech last night, ragging on the Supreme Court and, of course, bringing up January 6th.
Nearly 4 years ago, my predecessor sent a violent mob to the U.S. Capitol to stop the peaceful transfer of power. We all saw it with our own eyes. We sat there and watched it happen that day. Attack on the police, the ransacking of the Capitol, a mob literally hunting down the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, gallows erected to hang the Vice President, Mike Pence. I think it's fair to say it was one of the darkest days in the history of America. Now the man who sent that mob to the U.S. Capitol is facing potential criminal conviction for what happened that day. And the American people deserve to have an answer in the courts before the upcoming election. The public has a right to know the answer about what happened on January 6th before they are asked to vote again this year.
Well, the public has certainly gotten a tremendous amount of information on January 6th. And there's no defending one of the most embarrassing days, no doubt about it, in modern American history. You know, Joe Biden wants to put it up there with Pearl Harbor and 9/11. Sorry, buddy, that's not the case. But when it comes to embarrassing, yeah, it's really embarrassing. Pathetic? Absolutely. 9/11? Come on now. Now, Joe Biden says the American people deserve a verdict in this case before they go vote in November. I would ask him and ask his folks to look in the mirror and say, what does it say that, all you guys have got in large part is January 6th? You talk about it as much as you can. You hit it at the 152 mark of your speech last night. The fact that, if you believe the polling, you are losing to this guy who you continue to try to convince the American people led this insurrection like he's Mel Gibson in The Patriot. The fact that you're trying so hard to put that narrative into place and you are losing to this man. What does that say about you? When it comes to a verdict from the American people, they're making their verdict. And they will make their ultimate verdict on how they feel on November 5th. I know you want to empower, the rule of law to go after your political opponents, but the American people are the ones who are ultimately going to make that decision.
Remember that time Trump lunged at the steering wheel of the limo driver? Completely debunked.
Yeah. Well, they're going to keep trying. They'll break that one out pretty soon, I'm sure.
Probably dust that one off.
Yeah, they've got to do that. That's going to be coming out any moment now. Coming up on KCMO Talk Radio, a man died at a rodeo in the last couple of days in Missouri. We've got the details on that that broke yesterday here on KCMO. Well, we're still drying off from yesterday's downpour we got in the morning, but this broke yesterday afternoon, reading from Fox 4. The Holden Police Department releasing a statement Monday afternoon regarding a fatal lightning strike that killed a man at the rodeo in Holden, Missouri on Friday night. According to officers, emergency responders were called to the Holden Chamber of Commerce rodeo at the city park just after 11 p.m. on reports of a lightning strike in a parking area. Police said the victim was a 53-year-old man. As emergency responders arrived, they attempted to perform life-saving operations on the man and took him from the scene. But the Holden Police Department saying that he later died from his injuries. So that was Friday night in Holden, Missouri. Just an absolute tragedy, losing your life to a lightning strike out at the rodeo. But yesterday here in the Kansas City area, of course, we got dumped anywhere from, depending on where you were, 4 to 6 inches of rain around the metro. Highest numbers I'm seeing looked like Olathe had 5.7 inches. Oh, Grandview. 6.5 there, John.
I was on my way home, and I got sideswiped by Noah's Ark out there.
I wouldn't have left. I didn't leave the building until about 1:32 because I thought to myself,
I'm muttering, I didn't know anything about this. My umbrella's in the car, and I've got to make a dash for it. And I'm like, oh, man.
Says the news guy, right?
Yeah, right?
I didn't know this. What
the heck?
What is this all about?
Nobody said anything about monsoon.
Well, we got lunch brought to the office yesterday, and it was about 20 minutes late because we sent the intern out to go get it, and there were road closures all over Johnson County.
Yeah.
So
that's going to set up a tirade if we need one later, if somebody doesn't call in with one about yesterday and driving.
8:35, Tirade Tuesday here on KCMO. The poor intern was sweating bullets when he got back here.
Oh, and on the way home, I understand now because there are places where you're like, oh, yeah, there is a low area here because any place that was low was retaining water.
Well, no, John, he was sweating because he had a bunch of pissed off radio people, not because he had road closures out in Johnson County. He had some hungry radio people. Don't get on the wrong side of hungry radio people.
You get us all together and we've all run through our one-liners and jokes, and it's better be food.
So here are some of the totals. Overland Park, 5.3 inches. Lee Summit, 4.9. Lenexa 5.1, Olathe 5.7, DeSoto had 4.9, Grandview I mentioned at 6.5, Lake Winnebago, just over 3. Gardner had just under 3. Tonganoxie, 1.8. Leavenworth, 0.8. Downtown KC-Mo, 1.1 inch. So really, I mean, Johnson County got the brunt of it yesterday.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I got water in my basement again. So I've got to get that figured out. I'm not sure what's going on, but I got, I said to Kate, my neighbor sent me a text. He said, we got 4 inches in 2 hours. I'm like, oh, gosh, okay, that's not good. So I sent her down to the basement, and there it was. Water coming into our basement once again. So I've got to get that figured out. If you got a recommendation for me, please drop that on the text line, 913-4087-957, because I got to get that figured out sooner rather than later. Meantime, yesterday in Olathe, hundreds of employees were quickly evacuated from a burning building. This is from a large fire that took place at TVH Parts Company at about 2:15 in the afternoon. It's a plant located in an industrial park near West 164th Street and South Lone Elm Road. So they handle parts for forklifts, industrial vehicles, agricultural machinery, things of that nature. What caused this fire? The fire started on the roof of the building and involved its solar panels. About 300 employees inside the building were inside the building when the fire started, and they were all safely evacuated. No injuries reported. Gosh, you got to love the alternative energy, don't you? Just like I was thinking about people who, God forbid, have their electric cars and get caught in some high water yesterday. I'm pretty sure you do not want to be in your electric vehicle and then get caught in, a couple of feet of water. That sounds like it's a disaster waiting to happen no matter what car you got. But especially in those electric cars, I'd rather be in the gas-powered vehicle if I accidentally find myself in water that's a little too high than in my electric car. I'm just, throwing that out there. Another reason that, maybe gas is the way to go. Just saying, along with the fact that you sit there looking like a chump in the Hy-Vee parking lot, charging your car for half an hour to 40 minutes, as if we all don't have anything else better to do with our time than try to save the planet one EV at a time. But then you've got this. The solar panels went on fire out in Olathe and result in the building having to be evacuated at this industrial park. So once again, I can't speak to why exactly, but just throwing it out there as, maybe something people don't think about with these solar panels.
It's interesting that it came after a torrential downpour.
Yeah.
Or somewhere, within a few hours of it clearing the area, relative to, rather than it having been like 10 days over 100 degrees. We're like, geez, the thing's melted.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, there's no way you can blame the heat. You can blame, oh boy, climate change. Been so damn hot around here. It's like we just got dumped with 3 to 4 inches of rain.
For a couple hours.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, I don't know if that triggered something. They have not done their investigation yet, but it does bring up some interesting points in terms of when and how this may have happened down there in Olathe. So, just throwing it out there as a reason why you may want to think twice about some of these different things. Now, in the meantime, on the national level, we've got Joe Biden addressing the nation yesterday in the wake of the Supreme Court case that came down yesterday morning. It was right at the end of our show, and that's obviously been the top story around the country, locally, but also around the country, since that decision came down in Trump v. U.S. Well, what you've seen since then is a complete meltdown, and you've seen it in local media, you've seen it in national media, you've seen it all across the board, including in the Kansas City Star. This was posted yesterday. Now, it was in the Kansas City Star, but like so many things in the Kansas City Star, I'm not sure it was written by anybody in Kansas City, because it's written by a guy named David Mastillo, a former editor and columnist for USA Today. But it says here that he's now a regular Star opinion correspondent. So I guess the Star was looking for somebody else to do work outside of Kansas City, and they found this guy, is all I can think of. But he writes here, there's nothing conservative about the Supreme Court presidential immunity ruling. Writing, the Supreme Court's decision on Monday in Donald Trump's immunity case is a 119-page distillation of everything that is wrong with our politics. History will judge harshly the decision that creates an imaginary absolute immunity for a president's official acts. The Republican majority opinion in the Trump immunity case is a disaster of anti-constitutional thinking that fails to live up to the originalist standards that the conservative justices have so persuasively set as the course for our nation's highest court. It is a betrayal of the idea that no man is above the law. The dissent that brings to bear persuasive originalist thinking on this case that marks crystal clear Trump should face criminal indictment like any other American opens with a bald-faced lie. The biggest problem with the majority's position is that it makes up immunity out of whole cloth. As the dissent argues, the Constitution plainly contemplates the criminal prosecution of a president for wrongdoing when it says the process of impeachment does not protect anyone covered by the impeachment clause from future criminal liability. That includes presidents. Well, that was noted by the majority, that you are not protected when you are acting in your own personal interests. That's what they said in the majority. And you can either believe opinion columnists in the Kansas City Star, or you can take serious legal scholar opinions like, I don't know, former Attorney General Bill Barr, who said this.
That's right. I think this was a very sensible decision that I think most lawyers familiar with this area expected, which is this went up to the court in a very abstract posture, which was the government's very broad assertion there was no immunity whatsoever. What the court's saying here is no, there's absolute immunity when he's acting directly under the Constitution, carrying out a function under the Constitution. There is presumptive immunity when he performs an official act, and the government has the burden of showing that it can prosecute him for that without impairing the executive function. And finally, there's no immunity for unofficial or private acts. And I think the practical effect of this is that the district court is going to do what it really should have done at the beginning, which the government really should have had it do, which is do the analysis so the facts are going up to the Supreme Court. So as a practical matter, there's not going to be a trial of this case before the election.
That was former Attorney General Bill Barr on Fox News yesterday, giving his immediate reaction and a sober analysis, which, boy, is desperately needed. And trust me, there's no love lost between Bill Barr and Donald Trump.
The guest columnist, they props up his argument there. It's like holding a 2x4 or trying to get a 2x4 to hold up your porch roof, right? Where he says it provides absolute immunity. And it's like, no, it didn't.
No.
It did not provide it. And so the fact that you state the word and then build your little argument on that absolute is false.
Yes. And it's exactly what you've heard a lot of over the last 18 to 24 hours. 1 hour from now, we will have your first of the day text to win keyword to win that Morgan Wallen flyaway to Las Vegas. 750, 1050, 150, and 450 right here on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. At the top of the hour, new plaza owners. Should we buy what they are selling? Are you buying what they're selling? I have some questions. We'll get to it here on 95.7 FM. 15 minutes, plaza new owners spoke yesterday, and I'm afraid there's some cluelessness going on there. We'll get to just after 7 o'clock on KCMO. But I am just getting such a kick out of some of the clips I'm seeing on cable news as the fallout continues from Joe Biden's debate last Thursday. I mean, it was the story, of course, over the weekend. It filtered into yesterday, and frankly, it's not going anywhere. This is one of the problems for Joe Biden with how bad that debate was on Thursday. There's no debate coming up until September if that thing even happens. So for the next 2 months, all anybody is going to talk about is Joe Biden's debate performance. He doesn't do press conferences. He did his little 5-minute spiel last night ripping the Supreme Court. That was watched by a fraction of the amount of people that saw the debate last week. So this thing is going to linger for a very long time. It was a calculated risk by Joe Biden's team. And they figured, hey, week before Independence Day, people are off. There's not going to be maybe as many people watching. It's summertime, it's slower. All those things are true. However, with as bad as it went, those clips are not going anywhere. So now you've got media in large part in meltdown mode. But my favorite clip of anything I've seen on cable news on this issue came yesterday from Mika Brzezinski. She is the co-host of Morning Joe with Joe Scarborough. Remember, Joe went on TV on Friday and freaked out. He's like, Biden's got to step aside. This can't continue. This can't go on. And this came after the guy said in March that, this is the best Joe Biden's ever been. Well, he looked like a total horse's butt. So then he's covering his tracks on Friday. Well, then amazingly, his co-host, who he happens to be married to, rips him. He comes out over the weekend and apologizes on social media for suggesting Joe Biden should resign. And then he's not even on his own show yesterday. So his co-host, who's also his wife, gets on there and says this.
Now, our Joe, is off this morning on a planned vacation. On Friday's show, I should clarify, Joe said it may be time for Biden to consider stepping aside. He also said we should wait a few days to see how he responds. We're shoulder to shoulder on that. I do agree. Joe Biden has work to do. He has to do better. His team has to do a lot better. I'm just not ready, though, to count Joe Biden out. Not even close.
So the guy vacations, by the way, without his wife? I mean, what is that all? What's he doing? Sitting at home, maybe getting some peace and quiet? I suppose maybe if you work with your spouse, just sitting at home is actually a pretty good vacation. I don't know what that's like. I'm pretty sure Kate and I wouldn't want to work together co-hosting this show. John and Mark would want to kill themselves by the end of one show. But I was like, wait, so your co-host who you're married to is on a pre-planned vacation. Like, what's he doing? Where is he?
With video games in the box or something.
With that coiffed hair of, Joe Scarborough's. I could see him. He just comes home. He's got a bunch of, beer cans and sitting in his boxers and doing his little video game thing. That would be quite a scene. While she's kind of tearing into him on the side about, how dare you speak ill of Joe Biden like that. But yeah, so Scarborough's on a planned vacation. His wife's bailing him out yesterday on television. But then on the flip side, you've got this, and you got to give credit where it's due. CNN's been pretty tough in the wake of that debate last week. Anderson Cooper last night on CNN had on a guy named Mitch Landrieu, who is a Biden advisor. And CNN, who hosted that debate, not letting these guys off the hook.
It is now allowed the president to stand above the law, and Joe Biden's going to stand in the middle of that. He's going to build a better and stronger economy.
I get all
so
that.
people can continue to work hard.
Listen, I get all that.
Why do you all keep,
you're
I don't
making a
understand
good
that.
case.
You all keep dismissing.
No, because 72% of voters said that Biden lacks the mental. 72% of voters said Biden lacks the mental health for the presidency after the debate. That's up from 65% before the debate and 36% in June of 2020. That's obviously, I would think, a huge concern for you.
Anderson, there's no question that it's a huge concern.
All right, that's all you need to know. There's no question that's a huge concern, but they keep wanting to take the narrative and spin it back on, in the case of this guy, Mitch Landrieu, on the Supreme Court, their decision, Joe Biden's fighting for democracy, whatever kind of nonsense they're trying to push. But Anderson Cooper, to his credit, is not having it. Anderson Cooper's getting up there and he's like, listen, the vast majority of the American people don't think this guy's got the mental acuity to do the job. You've got to answer for that before you start worrying and complaining about Donald Trump destroying democracy, acting like a king, especially when there's plenty to point to with your own guy that would suggest, he's dabbled in that world of trying to act like a king. Dabbled. And that's me being generous because it's a holiday week here on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. I'm trying here. I really am. Now, coming up on KCMO, new owners had their big press conference amidst the monsoon yesterday down on the plaza. And I do think these guys have their hearts in the right place. I am pulling for them. We should all be pulling for them. It is in the best interest of Kansas City for them to succeed. the conversation continues to circle around what exactly is going to happen here in the weeks ahead. You know, you got this Democratic National Convention coming up in August, and it's perceived to be the deadline for when Joe Biden could remove himself off the ballot and somebody else could take over as the nominee in 2024. But it is much easier said than done. But the sharks are starting to circle here. They are smelling the blood in the water. And they're coming from all over the country. So recently you've had a couple of things take place. You've had Gretchen Whitmer, who is the governor of Michigan. She has come out and she has said privately, but then it's been reported publicly, so wink, wink, nod, nod, this was leaked. The governor of Michigan saying that that state is no longer winnable for Joe Biden. That has been the quote from Gretchen Whitmer, the current governor of Michigan, who called up Joe Biden's campaign chair, Jen O'Malley Dillon, and said, according to Politico, that Joe Biden cannot win Michigan. Well, why do you think that is? Now, I don't know if he can win Michigan or not. The polls show Biden down a little bit, but Gretchen Whitmer would say that because, well, she wants to be the president. She wants to be the fill-in for Joe Biden. And it's not a bad play. It's why the name Josh Shapiro has come up, the guy who's the governor of Pennsylvania, because then you lock up one, maybe two of these upper Midwest states with one of those governors being now on the top of the ticket. So you've got all these folks now seemingly pursuing the White House through their media allies. Then you've got this guy this is not a name I've heard before, but it just started getting propped up here in the last 24 hours. The governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, he's a Democrat. He has apparently big aspirations. Not a bad play, by the way, if the Democrats want to be perceived as moderate, to put a guy who's the governor as a Democrat in a red state. Hey, where's Laura Kelly? What's Laura Kelly up to? Huh? Speaking of Democrat governors in generally red states. Nah, I'm just kidding on that. But anyway, here was the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, talking to the media yesterday about, the White House and what might happen here going forward, knowing full well, according to reports, now he's got interest in possibly being the stand-in for Joe Biden.
What is your response to President Biden's debate performance last week?
Well, the debate performance was rough. It was a very bad night for the president. But he is still the candidate. Only he can make decisions about his future candidacy. And so as long as he continues to be in the race, I support him.
And so is there any thought that you might jump in? Is there any thoughts that you might slide into that slot if
would you if you had to? Only the president can determine his future as a candidate. He is the candidate, and as long as he is, I'm supporting him.
Do you have any comment on being named as a potential presidential candidate?
Well, listen, it's flattering when people mention your name and something like that, but I think it's a reflection of all the good things going on in Kentucky. As compared to the rest of the country, the temperature's been turned down here. Democrats and Republicans all excited about the jobs we're creating, the investment that we're seeing, the record low unemployment, the record low recidivism, decreases in our overdose deaths. Those are all really good things. So I think the rest of the country turns to us and says, how can a Democratic governor, a Republican General Assembly create really good results? And I think the answer to that is everything is not partisan. And people are tired of the clashes day in and day out. So when they look at what we have done in Kentucky, they see a better future that's beyond some of the back and forth that we see on the federal level.
Doesn't that sound like Laura Kelly? I mean, not like literally sound like Laura Kelly, but I mean, the pitch there is very similar to what Laura Kelly talks about here in Kansas. Republican, House, Republican Senate. I'm a Democratic governor, and we work together to cut taxes and things like that. I mean, that's what she has said and likely will continue to say. It's not entirely necessarily accurate on the ground, but it works. You just heard that guy, Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, pitch himself. I love the question. Would you do it if you had to? Yeah, I guess you could twist a politician's arm to become, the top of the ticket for the White House. Yeah, you could twist my arm. Anything for the country. Oh, come on. Of course these guys would. I mean, are you kidding me? It's like when the husband has to go on the golf trip for work. He walks out of the house with his clubs. Anything for the firm, honey. Anything for the firm. Just doing my duty for the company. You know those guys. I mean, we don't do that here. We don't travel. But you know plenty of guys like that, right? I'm just out here with my golf clubs for the company, doing business. Got to make the firm money, honey. You know how it goes. Got to get my handicap down from an 8 to a 6, right? Just like Joe Biden while he was the Veep. My handicap went down in the White House. Joe, I don't think that should be something you're bragging about, okay? If your handicap's coming down while you're the vice president, you ain't doing enough there, big fella. Goes to show you, do we really need a VP? If you can reduce your handicap as vice president, I think we got a problem there. But anyway, these are all the folks who are now lining up. You've got the obvious names, Gavin Newsom in California. You've got the Kamala Harris's, obviously. But then you have some of these other people, these governors in some of these states. And by the way, I will say this much. The Democrats are smart to look at governors. Governors are executives. Governors run things. I've always thought that governors make the best presidents because they run things. They're not blowhards in the Senate. They're not blowhards in the House. They're not do-nothing local mayors in South Bend, Indiana. They actually do things. By the way, I saw a meme of Gavin Newsom after that horrible debate for Joe Biden last week. It was like, Gavin Newsom gets hospitalized for 3-hour erection. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably true. He was probably on cloud 9 thinking he's next up. All right, so two things as we have a month to go until we have some intriguing primaries here in Kansas and Missouri. So now's when people start focusing on this stuff. I haven't spent a lot of time on some of these local races because what I've realized now in what'll be what we're in our 7th year now of the show is that the diehards care the months leading up to these elections, these local primaries, but most people don't care until now. You're a month out. It's kind of like cramming for a final exam. You can tell people, hey, that final is going to be, you tell your students in college, and trust me, we were all there. Finals on December 10th. Start preparing. And we're all doing all-nighters the night before. That's just how it goes. Or if you're John and Mark, you don't study at all. That's just how it goes. But for most of us, last minute, you start focusing, okay, I got to go vote. Who's this? Who's that? What's the deal? Whether it's a governor's race in Missouri, whether it's a sheriff's race in Johnson County, Kansas, now is when people start focusing and paying attention. So two things just dropped here on both sides of the state line. On the Missouri side, a new poll. And you take all these things with a grain of salt. This is from ARW Strategies. And it shows here Mike Kehoe with a lead of likely Republican primary voters. He's the current lieutenant governor. He's at 24%. While Jay Ashcroft, the Secretary of State, and State Senator Bill Eigel are locked in second place at 19% apiece. But 40% of voters, 38 to be exact, are still undecided. So this thing is wide open with 1 month to go. Support varies across the state's major media markets. In St. Louis, Kehoe holds a 25-19 lead on Eigel. Ashcroft's at 18. In Springfield, Ashcroft leads Kehoe 24-21. And Eigel's at 19. In Kansas City, Eigel leads Kehoe 28-21 with Jay Ashcroft in third place at 16%. That's here in Kansas City. How about that? Bill Eigel, by the way, came on this show last week and was just spitting fire, and I think that probably put him over the top in this poll, at least in the Kansas City area. I mean, he was just, he was fired up. It was unbelievable. I mean,
this is absolutely lit. This is lit.
He came right into the studio. He was like a minute late. These Missouri guys coming to Kansas, they get lost. He comes into Kansas, and he just runs into the studio. I'm like, killing time for a minute, 90 seconds. Sits right down in the chair in front of me, and he's just spitting fire all over the place. So go figure. Now, other polls have showed Eigel trailing by 10 to 15 points against Kehoe and Ashcroft. So you take it all. I mean, these state polls are they're guessing games. But at least they give you some idea of where things currently stand in that Missouri governor's race that is, right now, it's a 3-person race. There's a bunch of other people in there, but it is, for all intents and purposes, a 3-person race. Now, on the Kansas side, there's not nearly as much action on the Kansas side. There is a Kansas 3rd District primary between a couple of folks, and you've heard from some of them here, but, Sharice Davis keeps kicking butt, so I'm not sure how entertaining that's going to be, but, we'll see how it plays out next month. But the other one that's pretty interesting is the Johnson County Sheriff's race. Of course, Calvin Hayden is the current sheriff running for re-election in Johnson County. He is getting primaried by this guy, Doug Bedford. And new poll that was done by this group Coefficient shows that Doug Bedford finds himself at 34%, Cal Hayden at 16%, but 50% are undecided in this Johnson County Sheriff's race. I mean, that is a massive number of undecided. Once again, people aren't really paying attention until now. It's July. They're like, oh, yeah, I got to go vote next month. Who's on the ballot? What am I voting for? What should I pay attention to? What should I care about? Now is when all this starts. And, listen, you've probably seen some of the headlines involving the current sheriff, whether it comes to voter fraud and things of that nature. And people obviously have strong opinions on that on both sides of, that equation. And that's in part why he's getting primaried. And then the Democrats are running this guy, Byron Robertson, in Prairie Village. He's the guy who is the chief of police. Byron Robertson, is the chief of police right now in Prairie Village. And, we had him on the show. We were there for Back the Blue last fall. And, I don't think he's one of these far-left, woke-a-doke Democrats at all. I mean, he's a sharp guy. He's a police chief here in Johnson County. And he's going to be a formidable opponent for whoever wins the Republican primary. And, with the way Johnson County is obviously shaping up, that's going to be something that is interesting to watch, absent a lot of big races in Kansas this year. You don't have a Senate race. There's no governor's race, obviously. You've got the local or the federal congressional races, but that's kind of it. And frankly, I'm not sure how entertaining those are going to be. So the Johnson County Sheriff's race might be one where you say, okay, that's going to have some attention on the Kansas side of the state line. But there is much more action on the Missouri side as we approach August 5th and primary day. And you'll be hearing from more of these folks in the days and weeks ahead as we get towards crunch time.